Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Here we are, drone stuff this week on the 13th of March, 2018. G'day to Bruce, who's back from the dead. And we've got Craig and Louis with us so far. Richard promises that he's going to join us this week, but he finds himself broken down near Andover. And last I heard, about an hour ago, he was awaiting a breakdown vehicle to come and recover him and take him back to Reading. So so we shall see. We shall see what happens with him. Where should we start? I made a list. Oh, I know. I remember. We first of all have to congratulate. We joked. Was it last week that we joked, or the week before that we joked about getting as many words like AI and things like that as we possibly could into a headline? And Deep Aero managed to get the headline out there today that they're building AI-driven drone technology on the blockchain. 1 million points to Deep Aero. They got them all in. 1 million points.
We can remember a few other buzzwords to add to that. Drones.
Augmented reality. Where's the augmented reality?
Now, augmented virtual reality. We have to do a new one. Augmented virtual reality.
Well, it's all a situational awareness sort of a thing, isn't it? And we are going to see elements of that around and about. That is going to come to our world. But of course, you have to be a world leader in it before you can put a press release out on it. Anyway, so let's park that for now then. Where did I want to go first? Well, already I wanted to go. I know where I wanted to go. I wanted to go with saying really to Craig that also speaks, so putting all those buzzwords in and things like that, it speaks to a lot of the market reports and analysts. And there's been a couple of top 10 companies this last week that have gone very, people have been, if your company's been on the list, then you've been shouting about it, and others have been saying how's it been made up. And made up, I think, is the word. So I've ranted on a little bit. Craig, lift me out of this rant. And what was your opinion? You know the one we're talking about.
I do, yeah. It was the Drone Industry Insights report on the top 20 service providers globally. And I contributed to the discussion. I think it was on Facebook where I first saw it, but I've seen a couple of other discussions elsewhere about it. And there were different views about the validity of the report and, you know, how much research and intellectual rigor had been applied to it. I mean, my view of these sort of reports are that you just have to take a lot of them with a pinch of salt, because some of the work that's been applied to it might not necessarily be very wide in its scope. So, for instance, as an example, if you look at that list, there are 20 companies on there, 4 of whom are from the UK, and 2 of them are reasonably well known, and 2 of them are new on the market. And the selection criteria for that report was very much focused on open source information that was so it wasn't, for instance, geared, or it wasn't derived from things like the profitability of the company and what the business model was, and how successful that company was in terms of actually delivering. So the data that was actually used to sort of arrive at those findings was predominantly things like social media output and the amount of investment. So when you look at those, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because there were some big names on that list, but there were also some big names that weren't on that list. So, you know, for instance, Measure, the US drones as a service provider was on there. And interestingly, when I looked at the readout report on the Drone Industry Insights website, the first sentence to describe Measure stood out to me, because it said Measure was one of the largest and leading drones as a service providers in the States. It didn't say it was the biggest, and yet it was number 2 on the list. And yet there were some companies that weren't represented on there, like Kesbury and Precision Hawk, both of whom are involved in service provision and are big players. I've done some collaboration with Precision Hawk in the past, and you know, those guys are big players. They have a big footprint, they've got big investment, they've got big plans, but they weren't represented on the list. So I think in that sense, you just need to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. Reports like that are essentially provided for the investment community to look at, you know, what the future growth of the industry is. for the likes of me, a lowly consultant working, slaving away at the bottom of the pyramid. Interesting information, perhaps, but not necessarily information that is going to push my particular company strategy in a particular area, because I'm not absolutely sure, how the conclusions that they've come to have been arrived with any form of scientific basis. So, and they are one of a number of analytical companies that have sort of arrived on the scene, focused very much on the drone industry. And a lot of it is just simply to try and quantify where we are going. The problem with that, of course, is there are so many moving parts to it, and there are so many external factors which affect it, that it's very difficult to try and determine that. I mean, it's their business model. They're trying to produce a product which they can then sell onto industry. And I'll give you an example. When I first came into the industry in 2012, I remember speaking very clearly to a salesperson from the Teal Group. And I was setting up my UAV business unit. I was very new into the industry, didn't know a great deal about it, probably didn't have the time to go online and do a bit of research. And this guy approached me, and the report he was offering me was literally $3,500 US, which I couldn't justify to anyone above me in the executive space. And I just thought, that's a ridiculous amount of money for a relatively small business unit. Things have changed slightly. There's a lot more open source information, but the likes of Drone Industry Insights, the information that they've used is open source. It is available. If you've got the time and the inclination and the research skills to go and find it, you can go and do it. Those guys, it's their business model. They go and do it on your behalf, and hopefully they can sell you reports at a much reduced cost. If you look at the basic product cost on their website, they are much reduced. It's $1 to a couple of $100 US to buy, which is a bit more affordable now for guys perhaps like me. Although I might not necessarily buy that out of principle, I might just go and find that information myself.
I was going to ask Bruce if he had any opinions in this. Following other sort of technology industries as you do, you must have seen this sort of report generation across multiple sort of levels of industry. What's your thought on that sort of world?
Yeah, there was a big demand for that before the internet became as widespread as it is. I remember back, certainly in the early days of the computer industry, it was big money. There were a lot of people with these insider newsletters and knowledge newsletters that people would sign up for, sometimes for thousands of dollars a year usually, and that would give them useful inside information. But these days, it is just a case of it's all out there. And seriously, if you were a reasonable sized organization, you'd just hire someone on a low wage to churn those reports out for you and probably save you a lot of money and get them more specifically tailored to your requirements. So it's a hard sell these days, I think, but there definitely is a market for it. And if it's a small organization producing these reports and they're well versed in the data mining required, I mean, there's a niche for them in the market. But as you can see from here, it's a hard sell, certainly, because at the bottom end, people have got the time but not the money. And at the top end, people have got enough money to hire their own staff to do the job for them. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be in that position.
So it's a matter. We are also bombarded with these guys selling the report of this and report of that, the insight of this, the insight of that, and we have our own source of that. We have a guy at the company that developed a series of queries on Google that go and filter out all the news that come up with a few strategically placed keywords, and then he filters them out again. And we have our own reports, so we could build multi-$1,000 value reports. And even we've learned how to filter out those automatic press releases that are sold, that are companies offering to produce at $50 per press release they produce. So at the moment, someone that is inside the specific industry like drones as the way, in a very cheap way, to produce an automatic scraper of news around the internet, thanks to the Googles and Bings And I'm mentioning the two because we use both engines to do all that scraping for us. So we managed to get constantly updated reports on what is the real news on this market.
I can't help thinking it's still those reports are still driving the hype a little bit, and I always raise a little wry smile to myself every time I see one of the many minis that come into my inbox every day that mention one of America's top producers of platforms, 3DR. As soon as you see 3DR still making hardware, it's like, still making those, like, nah, you don't know what you're talking about there.
Those are the specific examples. Those are the specific examples of. We've received one of the latest ones we've got is a company based in India that we just give them the keywords and they'll produce the press releases for us. So you just give them drones USA. We use Pixhawk, and they go and scrape and build a press release for you. And those
I'm working on an artificial intelligence blockchain augmented virtual reality system just to do that, Louis.
Oh, come on. You stole my augmented virtual reality.
Well, I actually think augmented reality has got quite a lot of leeway in our world. I don't quite understand why we're not using it in conjunction with our ground control stations, where people that sit inside a van and have cameras pointing outside and give us a much better air picture. Put the
Epson glasses. Those Epson glasses seems like a good approach to that virtual reality, more perhaps feasible than anything I've seen so far. It really depends on the amount of computer power that you have available and what is applicable to what you're seeing, and for that you really need a lot of computer power, and like Bruce said, lots of augmented reality that makes sense to do place on those. But we are veering off of the study market.
Well,
you can see air traffic control is going to become this sort of, like you see on the sci-fi movies where they just move stuff around and it's all up there in 3D virtually in front of them. I can see that being a fantastic use of that technology to give them a three-dimensional view of the airspace rather than just a two-dimensional one, and having to interpret the altitude by the little markers on the aircraft be so much easier.
Yeah, no, exactly, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have that almost with our GCS technology. When we're sat in the van, you've got your man outside and your man inside. Why are we still looking at one monitor in front of us? Why can't we have monitors all around, so when we look around, we see whatever the crew are doing outside and shouldn't be doing outside? It's not too much to do, and you could get quite far ahead of her with the air traffic world's actually moving towards a load of cameras on a stick. London City has it. I'm not sure about what other airports have it in the UK, where the actual tower part is going away, and they're all going to be sat at Swanwick. I don't know, quite understand how it'll work when they jump from one tower to another, or whether they'll always. Have you got any insight on that, Craig? Have you seen that?
Yeah, well, I'm ex air traffic control, as you know, and I've still got quite a lot of connections in the air traffic world. And I think what you're talking about is the remote control tower concept, and that's starting to be introduced now. It was a massively contentious issue in air traffic management for a long time, but like drone technology, it's starting to be embraced now. And I think it's indicative of a number of new technologies that are starting to be sort of adopted. And to come back to Bruce's point about using augmented and virtual reality to do the controlling element, I think that is the future of air traffic control. There's still a bit of a gap to make, a leap to make from where we are now to that reality, because there is a fundamental step change in how you control. but those changes are being made all the time with the introduction of, with the development of the Single European Skies and NextGen, which is the US equivalent, the way that they integrate together, and ultimately integrate into both of those domains the unmanned traffic management piece. So it'd be interesting to see how augmented reality is going to sort of contribute to that. I've from a non-drone control perspective, I've seen augmented reality used in the construction industry using drone technology, but not to control it, the survey data output. And it's astonishing some of the things, you know, that they're able to do. I think there's still some work to be done there, but you know, it's a very exciting time. I don't fully understand it because I'm just a drone geek, but yeah, I think it's certainly going to take hold. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, because the only barrier I think might be how regulations impact it as a control function, if you like. I think at the moment regulators are, you know, they're struggling to sort of keep up with the basic idea of unmanned aircraft. So when you start to introduce even more new technologies, they might really struggle to sort of keep up. But I guess we'll kind of see. We'll see how that goes.
But it's just going to be cheap and pervasive. I think. I don't think. You know, it's a why wouldn't you do it sort of a thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the regulators are just. Yeah, they're going to have to pedal very, very hard. Actually, it's a pity Richard's not here with us yet because, of course, he's just been speaking to the regulators. But I can't do the link. I was going to say, speaking of pedaling, let's get a taxi for Bruce. But that wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to work at all. So we won't do that. But Bruce, well, we're back on the hype train. We can get on the hype train, get off the bicycle, get on the hype train, and then get on to Bruce's air taxi. That's just down the road from you. Have you ordered it yet, Bruce?
Well, yeah, I just used my smartphone app to order one, but they said it'd be about 5 years, so I'll have to have a cup of coffee while I'm waiting. But yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? That New Zealand is seen as the place where you can do this kind of testing because our regulations are somewhat more easygoing than the USA. But this is not, we don't have a good track record in this area, because if you look closely, our national icon is a flightless bird. And we, as a country, invested $1 million in the Martin jetpack. So we really don't, we're not good at picking winners, I'll tell you that. And this air taxi thing, I mean, there's people doing it, you've got Airbus doing it, everyone's doing it all over the world. And looking at the craft that they've built, it really, from an aerodynamic perspective, it's not that flash in terms of efficiencies. So I guess they've got something, it's flying, they're going to test it, end of story. It's like a press release, nothing to see here, move along.
What Come about on, Bruce. Efficiency is somewhat an overrated concept. You just have to be able to look good on the pictures.
Yeah, it's very hard to compete with an R-44 or a helicopter in this particular scenario, the air taxi scenario, because you've got an established technology that's been there for many years with a proven safety record, apart from flying over certain pieces of New York City waterways. And so, there's a whole lot of overhead and difficulty bringing in a completely new technology. And I'm wondering if a lot of these companies aren't doing it simply because they can, not because they can see an economic or a safety benefit. It's simply because they can and they want to be seen at the leading edge of the technology. And that's not the right reason to do things when people's lives are involved.
Well, let's try and unpack that a little bit then. What is the advantage? I was also trying this morning to think, well, what really is the advantage of this thing? And I couldn't get there. And I wanted to ask you about the propellers as well. Those look very interesting. And what also looks very interesting is the multiple angles on those motors. They're all over the place. They look like they're performing slightly different jobs to what we might normally expect. But yeah, what's the advantage? It's electric. And then quickly my head started thinking, well, I bet they'll get an electric R44 out the door before 10 or 15 years are out. So what is the advantage of that sort of platform? Or can we think of an advantage?
I don't know that there is any advantage other than it is cutting edge. You're right up there with Airbus. Because electric, okay, you're talking about small commuter flights, so range probably isn't too much of an issue. But then you've got charge times, and it's like It's electric because electric is also the in thing. So it's multi-rotor because multi-rotors are in. It's electric because electric's in. It's an air taxi because that's in. But bottom line, are they producing a solution for a problem that doesn't exist yet? Because helicopters have been doing this for decades and they do it really, really well. And you don't have to sit around waiting for half an hour, an hour to charge them up. You just slosh a bit of fuel in them and away they go again. So yeah, I just wonder. It's just a money pit for people to throw money at, I think. I don't see yet that it's a practical thing. And despite all the tests, look how much it takes to get past certification with most aviation authorities. How long will it take, even if this thing does fly, how long before it's actually able to be bought off the shelf? And by then, of course, there'll be a whole new set of technologies that will have eclipsed it anyway.
I think the other factor to consider is, and Bruce is absolutely right about whether we are producing something to solve a problem that doesn't exist. The other factor to consider is that this is not a drone. Well, it is a drone in the way that it's controlled, but it's going to have people on board, people who aren't controlling the function of the drone, but nevertheless, it will have people on board. And so it's a slightly different prospect to what we currently encounter with the applications of drones in our world, which is to replace the human being either in a helicopter or on a cherry picker or in a harness at the top of a wind turbine blade or in high ropes, dangerous places. The passenger still has to get on the aircraft, so it has to be certified to a greater level. The only thing you're taking out is the piloting function. That's the only difference.
That's one of the things that we at the Ardo Pilot are very careful. Is we don't endorse in any way, shape, or form the utilization of the code that Ardo Pilot has developed when a human life is at stake. So these guys go out and do their own code. The code to do that, as we all know, any code that goes on a flying vehicle that has to do the certifications has to comply with certain requirements, the 0138 and a few others. And I'm not so sure that there was a measure of how much does it cost to produce one line of code according to those certifications. And even with crazy investments that some of these companies say they have, the money is not enough for do a full stack certification of code that is compliant.
I'm just adding to the comments. Can you believe the man that made or was part of designing the propellers for that thing's on the chat? He's on the live chat.
Oh, that's right. We better know what we're talking about then.
I'd like to know all about those propellers. So Delta Z Solutions, email Gary at susnews.com and I will bring you into the chat if you may. I want to know all about them because they're pretty funky, those propellers. And yeah, yes, if they had said, I think the trouble is everyone's hanging their hats on the air taxi. Why? Well, I say we've already said there's a helicopter there for that and a manned version and then that's all part of the all part of the current solution. But if they said emergency deliveries in war zones, medical deliveries in terrible weather or something like that, and get rid of those people, it could be a very handy platform. I don't quite understand I do understand it because my grandfather always thought he grew up between the wars and he thought by now we'd all have our own flying cars, personal helicopters, whatever. That's why he really believed that's the age we're going to live in. So it's not really any different to a sort of a Dan Dare viewpoint of the world moving forward. But Delta Z, let's see if he sent me. Someone pick up while I check my email. Gary at SUS News, Delta Z.
Speaking of future technologies that are due to arrive, I see that MIT has announced that nuclear fusion is only 15 years away again.
Yes.
What? Wasn't that 16 years ago?
It was 50 years ago they started touting it as being just a decade away, but now MIT, in conjunction with an Italian energy company, have said they expect to have a nuclear fusion plant hooked up to the grid and delivering electricity within 15 years. And I think that they have a role in aviation making pigs fly.
Yes. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, well, perhaps I need to go back through all of the back issues of Flight International are out there. Perhaps I need to go through all the back issues of Flight International and see just how many times flying taxis come up in the last 100 years. I bet it's a cyclical thing that you could apply. It's a bit like your open source data again, isn't it? So yeah, I'm trying to get this man in here. And
who remembers the Fairly Rotodyne? Was it Fairly? What was the
Rotodyne?
Rotodyne. That's it. Yeah, that was going to be an air taxi, wasn't it?
Well, that was a very big one, wasn't it, with the tip jets? But of course, that got rid of the
Airbus.
Have you guys seen the picture of that guy that was starting a personal transportation mean that had a lot of propellers on top at South by Southwest?
No, I
haven't seen that.
No, a guy that had a kind of a cylindrical structure above his head, tied like what it seemed like a backpack, some crazy stuff. But it's South by Southwest, so
yeah.
The Wanderer's right.
Richard's here.
Richard's here. Richard.
Hey everyone. Apologies
Richard,
for my extreme tardiness.
Where exactly did you break down, Richard?
About 10 minutes south of Andover. So your old stomping
ground. Should have called an air
now.
taxi, mate. Should have just called one of these flying taxi things.
Exactly.
You had no idea how many times I was wishing this was a possibility right now. But yeah.
Andover's a funny old place. I've been through there on the 303. I don't know, more times than I dare to count, I suppose. Just trying to bring a design of a propeller on board. You might have seen that. I'm sending you a link in Delta Z via Google Plus. So Google Plus link has just gone off to you. So if you enjoyed this,
by the way, Gary, have you had your question clarified that you were seeing ADSB traffic on Altitude Angel?
No, I haven't had it clarified. I don't know if it's either Richard, if Altitude Angel's putting ADSB traffic into Mission Planner now, or somebody else's. But it's definitely popping up and in and out of Mission Planner when I'm flying in Sizzle now. I'm definitely seeing. I think it's from ADSB Exchange, but I have noticed the heli routes have gone on to Altitude Angel now, which made me chuckle. So I had a couple of flights down there. But yeah, no, I haven't had a definitive answer about that, Louis. But obviously, it's very cool if that is the if the case, if ADSB is making its arrival, and we'll have to wait Michael's words on what's happening.
Michael or Richard, just ask Richard.
You can ask me. So this is nothing that we're kind of specifically putting into Mission Planner at the moment. What I would say is we're going to do some open source work again with the Mission Planner guys in the coming probably couple of months, actually, where we have this thing called a flight declaration, which is an open protocol we did through, we open sourced it and then we submitted it to Gutma. And the idea behind the sharing is if you tell us where you're going to fly and when, then in exchange for that information, we'll provide additional situation information, and that will include the ADSB feed of aircraft that are calculated by Altitude Angel to be heading towards your area of operation. Now, in addition to that, we'll also start monitoring that area for NOTAMs, and we'll start monitoring for weather conditions that might affect your flight. Now, we do all of this today, but you have to do the monitoring. Whereas if you tell us where you're going to be and when, we'll then push that information to you. And the first kind of public implementation we'll have of that out in the wild in the open source will be through the Mission Planner guys. So yeah, there you go. You heard it here first.
That's fantastic. I've forgotten actually. There's a whole list. You've been not just tardy recently. You just plain haven't turned up. And from so many rants to have at you. So let me just read.
I'm glad I came now.
Yeah. I'll just make your bad day.
I think it's right the opposite. You shouldn't have come.
I noticed in the Gutma, the first reason I was going to, but the reason you've not been here is because you've had lots of really positive stories on the way. So that's very cool.
We've been busy.
Yeah, you've been busy. Gutma puts the Arpez operator last in its graphics. Is that going to change? It's going to come in from operator up, or is it all going to be government first?
So I figured that you would be asking me this question. So I've got a question back for you, mister. There are two diagrams for architecture in the Gutma document. Are you talking about the one on page 13, illustration 2, or the one on page 14, illustration 3?
Well, of course, my knowledge of the Gutma documents is so vast and great that I feel
a good book, as we shall call it.
Now you see Gary practically going to Google. Where is
page 13 on the 13th? But it's not Friday, is it? So that's just the one I pulled down. Actually, where was it? It was here somewhere.
Yeah, it may need a little refreshing. I think it's fair to say. I think the document itself is relatively old. I think is a fair assumption of it. It was published, I think, probably over a year ago, if memory serves me correctly. And actually, I think the lead on this group was the Unifly guys. And I think they took that upon themselves primarily because of their fairly extensive ATM experience. And I think it's fair to say the whole landscape has evolved quite a bit since then. Now, looking at the diagrams, I had to go. I must admit, I like you guys. I didn't have this burnt into my mind. I had to go and look it back up, and I've got it on my screen here, reminding myself of that. The UAS operator on the first diagram, which is illustration 2, does feature, but you'll see there's a load of other stuff in there, which is really more around trying to outline what the components of a UTM are, as opposed to what the flow of information through a UTM is. Because I think in the latter scenario, the UAS operator is probably the originator and the receiver of most of the data flow in and out of a UTM. You're here to ultimately make a UTM, make a drone operation safer, and therefore, it kind of starts and it ends with the drone operator. Now, clearly over time, and I think what the Gutma documentation is trying to show is what are all the other components that you need if you start to involve other humans in that process less and less. And I think that's probably where there's been the greatest change in people's understanding over the last 12, 18 months of what different components of systems are required in order to make that happen. So I wouldn't say that this is certainly not a reference architecture that we would recognize or use, for example, at Altitude Angel, but I think it's helpful just trying to level the playing field a bit when people are trying to understand, when you say UTM, what is it you're actually talking about? And I think this was the original reason that Gutma put this document together, because I think even if you do a quick Google search today, I have a Google search for UTM system. So every time I get a new ping in that, it tells me that someone else has built a UTM system in the world. And most people, I think, would be thinking that a UTM system is an app that gives you information about where you can fly or where you can't. That seems to be the most common, I would say, misunderstanding. But I think the Gutma documentation does a nice job, at least, of saying, actually, hang on a second, guys. UTM is a big thing, and there are lots of different players. Where I think the document doesn't go quite far enough, though, is saying, clearly, what are the services offered by a competent UTM? What's kind of like UTM Foundation, what's Foundation 2, Foundation 3? And there are other documents that do that, particularly in Europe, and the NASA guys have one as well. They talk about the different capability levels. So I would say, I don't think they've forgotten the operator, but I think it's a symptom of, this is quite an old document. Understanding in it was kind of memorialized at a point in time. And it's also very much more from an ATM focus, I think, than from a drone operation or a drone operator focus. And I think that's something which could do with some evolution, personally.
Can I just confirm, Richard? Is it the architecture document dated April 2017?
Let me just check. I'll skip right past that. It is indeed the one, April.
Right, that's
fine. Over a year.
Yeah, well, not quite. But,
no, it's not. It is in my head. I've gone ahead in time.
Yeah, well, you obviously time.
Probably almost is for Bruce because he's ahead of us. But
he is a bit.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Well, so that was my first round, but it did. It sort of didn't didn't sit right with me. But then very quickly after that, Bruce had another rant, and because of course we'd been promoting Altitude Angel like Billio, and there was a jet flying event at his airfield there, or not his airfield, the People's Airfield, the Council's airfield,
The People's Airfield.
yeah, and the NOTAM wasn't shown, but I thought that was to do with timing, and I haven't warned you and prepared you for this question.
You have not, sir.
No, but perhaps you could unpack how does the NOTAM thing work? So I think we spoke about that, didn't we, Bruce? I mean, if you're from a flight planning angle, do NOTAMs arrive 10 hours before they're due, or do they arrive at the time they go active?
So I can talk you through this. While I do, please enjoy this blue duck. So from a NOTAM perspective, I think it's fair to say that we're plugged into lots of real-time feeds for that, and the predominant one that we use for most of the European countries. Presuming are we talking about a European country here, or are we talking about
New Zealand? New Zealand.
New Zealand. Okay. So, well, actually, I think I would need to check, but I think we get a lot of that information anyway through Eurocontrol, and we have a real-time connection into a worldwide NOTAM feed from a couple of suppliers, but Eurocontrol is our predominant NOTAM feed. Now, those NOTAMs, the moment they're published onto Eurocontrol, they're picked up by Altitude Angel, and they have to go through a process. I will call it parsing, but I think it's fair to say that's quite a complex process. Quite often it has to be cleaned. We have significant IP that we've invested at Altitude Angel in understanding the text elements of those NOTAMs and turning them into something which would be relevant to a drone operator. Now, the reason this is relevant is because let's assume that we get a ping on our pipeline for these NOTAMs. And the first thing we do is we crack that NOTAM open, have a look at it and see, is it for now, or does it contain an activation start time and an end time sometime in the future? Now, if it's the latter, I think I would need to check, and again, you've caught me on the hop here, but I think it's up to 5 days or up to 7 days ahead of time. If we've got a start time, we will show this on our map as a blue area, which would indicate that the area is going to become active, but is not yet active. Now, when it does become active, it will either become red or yellow, depending on what the content of that NOTAM is. So if we think it's an area you shouldn't be flying in, it will likely go red. So if it's a temporary flight restriction, for example, if it's describing a hazard, such as a crane, then it will likely go yellow. There are regional differences to these things. So I'm, without knowing where you're talking about, and I'm happy to have a look and send it to the guys in our data team to figure out if we're missing an NOTAM. I would say that is pretty exceptional if we are. But again, because we don't just rely on one source, it would have to be missing from two, or there would have to be the same problem prevalent in both feeds if we're missing it. So if you guys, if you want us to follow up, and actually just while anyone's listening, if you do spot a data error, or you think you've got an issue with the AIP information that we're showing, you can actually email us 24/7, hello@altitudeangel.com, and 9 times out of 10, we'll get back to you within a day with an answer on what's actually happening.
Okay, well, maybe Bruce, you can unpack your experience with that for Richard, and you can get on to his people. Did you think perhaps your Hobbit was unavailable on the day or something?
When I looked on the Altitude Angel, I knew the NOTAM had been issued by CAA, but there was no reference to it at all on Altitude Angel's website, and I think it showed up on the day that it came into effect rather than as a precursor to the NOTAM, actually coming in. So I think the NOTAMs were issued at the beginning of the week. The event was at the end of the week, and they didn't appear until the hour that the NOTAM actually came into effect. So maybe it was a propagation delay through the system or something. I don't know.
Can you maybe just point me at the location, and I'll just have a look and see what I can find on my map. But I need one of the guys on the data team to go in and have a look at the actual pipeline, because one of the things we do is we log everything.
Yeah, it was at NZTO, which is our airfield designator here, and it was way back. It was a month or so ago.
Yeah,
it was a model
he hasn't bothered coming, so we haven't been able to ask him. We could have asked him the Tuesday afterwards if he bothered to turn.
Could have been a few years ago now. Yeah,
couldn't have been the way he is. Yeah, the way he is. In the questions we're getting, and don't let me get this wrong. I'm sure you won't, Richard. But they don't actually charge for the service for this for this. I don't know how they're making the money. And if you look, I've put a link in the chat and look at, we just call it the drone safety map. That is the data that you will get. There's no app. Well, that's another thing, isn't it? There are apps. There's no app for here, and there's no app for Bruce. And Bruce went off onto the interwebs, and he typed in Angel, and he got no end of apps that were not appropriate and suitable.
Well, I'm sure a lot of those were slightly more entertaining than ours were if you download those, Bruce. But you can, for example, the NATS app, which most people will assume is the only app we have, that won't work anywhere except the UK. But it does use exactly the same data that's in Drone Safety Map. But what I would say is we have our own app, which is called straightforward. It's called Guardian. Fly your drone safely. It's not the most catchy name, I will admit. But if you go to Guardian, is that Guardian or is that Nat? I can't place it.
It's Guardian.
This is what I got when I looked search for altitude Angel.
Oh, Bruce, don't be nasty. I told you.
You can see my search query. Yeah, you can see my search query, and you see what it brought up. That's the first entry it brings up.
So have you searched for Guardian at all? And maybe we don't release it. I'll have to check. Maybe we just don't like you, Bruce.
No, it's not available from the website. I couldn't download it when I finally found it. It says not available in your country, which is a bit of a shame.
Same here as well.
Here is my notepad, and you are witnessing live technical support here. So we seem to have an issue with New Zealand app available.
And South Africa.
No, because it's running perfectly here in Portugal. I'm on an high-risk area. Sorry, guys. It's your problem.
So I think it needs to be available here, though, because EMAP is making big inroads here with the Civil Aviation Authority, and it'd be nice to be able to speak from a position of authority as to compare EMAP to Altitude Angel in terms of the functionality services offered and the usability, because otherwise EMAP is just going to get a leg in because no one else has looked at anything else.
So there are things afoot that I cannot talk about here, which will become relevant soon. But what I would say is, if you are struggling for app availability in your region, now that we know that there's a distribution issue with New Zealand and with South Africa, I'll get the guys to look at that first thing in the morning here tomorrow, and hopefully we can get that in the store released for you in the next, 24 hours or so. In the meantime, the app will use the data that's available on dronesafetymap.com anyway. So if you need a version that you can use, you can still head to dronesafetymap.com, or you can go to the version on the SUAS News website and go to that area. But I appreciate, obviously, it's not the same as having kind of like a native mobile experience. So thank you for letting me know. We will fix that, and we will get it available in that country very soon, in those countries rather.
Good man. Richard in the comments is saying, if it's for non-commercial, I'm guessing that it's in the US, then it's not showing the correct zone of 5-mile radius around heliports in the USA, at least for my local area. Sent email several months ago.
I missed all of that because for whatever reason it just dropped out of the audio. It sounded like it was going to be rude, so maybe it was my brain just filtering it out. It really did just drop, so that was a really inconvenient time. So if you wouldn't mind just doing that.
Oh yes, whatever you like then. Another Richard that says if it's for non-commercial, then it's not showing the zone of 5-mile radius around heliports in the USA, at least for my local area. Sent email several months ago.
Okay, well, the first thing to do is apologize profusely for losing an email. It's obviously rare that we do that, but I don't know what the time scale was, but we did switch to a new ticket system, and there's a chance that we maybe lost 1 or 2. So firstly, as the owner of Altitude Angel, I am absolutely really sorry that you can get through to us. On the second aspect, at the moment, we're going through a process of digitizing, digitizing the regulations for different countries. Now, if you go and have a look at, for example, one of our competitor maps, they'll ask you to choose the regulations that you want to fly under in a particular location and then do some changing of those shapes on the map. One of the challenges with that is a lot of people don't know what to choose. And equally, a drone can't necessarily tell you what regulations apply. So actually what we're doing at the moment is, and we know about this issue in the US, we're not actually changing the data that goes out on the map for the US regulatory landscape at this point. So you're not going to see those kind of what I would term to be a local change. So you're seeing essentially the raw AIPs for the US at the moment. the more astute among your followers will notice that we used to have a version of the map on our older website, which was at altitudeangel.com/map. This was what we called our legacy map. This was much more colorful. It was, it was the equivalent of a V1, I would say. And this actually did do these local changes in the US. But it was very difficult and very cumbersome for us to change those, and especially when we were starting to import things like the FAA facility maps, it was a bit of a pain. So we leveled the playing field, and we created the version 2 essentially for our safety map, and we'll be introducing an update to that towards the end of this month that will give more flexibility and more appropriate guidance in the US. So again, on the first issue, apologies, we lost your email. And again, if you email us at hello@altitudeangel.com, we should pick that up. It should all be tracked now. It should be easier for us to follow. And on the second issue, you should see an update coming out. Well, where are we now? Just a couple of weeks' time, really, which will fix that localization aspect back for the US again.
Now, the only complaint I have with Altitude Angel is around me is all red. So I have an issue with that, but
we get this a lot. Actually, we get some angry people. Probably they write in once or twice a month. There are people like this all over the world that blame us for putting red zones over their house or over their favorite flying area. So my standard response to all of these folks is, look, we just show you the data, right? Don't shoot the messenger. It's better you know.
I'm not complaining because I have the app from our local regulator, and yours is right on top. So here in Portugal,
the same here at the People's Airport.
Sorry, Bruce.
It is the same here at the People's Airport. It's also red everywhere.
Yes. I think it is the People's Airport shortly, isn't it? For a small $3 fee to come and join and fly with everybody. It is the People's Airport for today, isn't it?
As long as you meet certain criteria, you can do that.
Oh, and what are those certain criteria for those people that might want to join you flying there?
You've got to have a CAA recognised certification, such as a pilot's licence or wings, or be under the direct supervision of someone who has the said qualification.
Well, there we go then. And when is this event happening at your People's Airport?
Our non-event is happening at Easter this year. We're not sure exactly when because the weather is very fickle at this time of the year, as it is every other time of the year. But yeah, we're just inviting people to come along, and we'll be putting more information out as we get closer to the event. So if you want to come and fly next to Microsoft Hill and the tower and rub shoulders with some of the largest reprobates in the hobby, then you're welcome to do so.
Is that really Microsoft Hill, or is that just something you made up?
No, it's really, we call it Microsoft Hill because everything crashes on it.
I see. I didn't realise that. Very good. Very good. What else are we going to do? So do we have to bother Richard for anything else? I can't remember. Oh, I know what we had to bother Richard about. We had to bother Richard about being...
just reaching for my bottle of gin now, so I'm just going
to... Yes. I drink. Actually, funny enough, I did work with somebody that drank gin by the pint, and they have a particular square bottle in Kenya, and he made the end wall of his house out of gin bottles. But anyway, that's different times. Different times.
Was this an air traffic control? Was it?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's it's clear as well, so you can see through it. So it's perfect for making a tower. Yeah,
so that's augmented reality version 1980s, right?
He was
otherwise known as beer glasses.
Yeah, he was quite the character with his gin. Anyway, moving on. I watched the webcast. You're now working with NATS in the UK, which is the National Air Traffic Service there, and Altitude Angel is embedded, I understand, in ops rooms already in the UK. How does that work, and in what way is it embedded? And congratulations.
Okay, thank you. So I guess what changed was the public announcement and the formalization of the work we're doing with NATS around, specifically around UTM. I think it's no secret that we've been working with NATS for a long time. We've been doing the Drone Assist app for them. We're helping them out with the Drone Safe campaign in the UK. I think what's what was really great to be able to do just a couple of weeks, well, where was it, last week actually, was just to kind of formally announce to folks the partnership and what it means and what we're trying to achieve. So I think you called out a few things there. I think did you see? I think you were referring to the video. You watched the video interview, right? So I have to apologize as well to everyone who saw me in that video, because that was the day that all the snow in the world fell on London City Airport. And that was the day that I landed. I flew back from Frankfurt, got to London City Airport at about 7 in the morning. And then it took me the best part of 4.5 hours to go 30 miles on various cancelled trains, because it was raining and it was snowing and there were leaves and all the transport exploded. And I turned up and I had about 2 minutes to sit down with Andy and then go straight on air. So it was not, I was not looking as enthusiastic as I felt. That's fair to say. But there, Andy kind of let everyone know that NATS are running today live in their ops room a system that we have at Altitude Angel, which is called PAMS, which stands for our Protected Airspace Management System. And PAMS essentially is what we call a foundation product. And PAMS right now is handling GA requests to fly through Class D airspace in the UK. So actually, if anyone goes to a website called aup.nats.aero for Airspace User Portal, not AOP, as a lot of the Northerners in the UK will say. If you go to aup.nats.aero, that service is actually delivered by Altitude Angel on behalf of NATS, and it's an entry point into the foundation UTM technology. Now, you're probably wondering what a UTM company, what earthly business a UTM company does, or has rather, working with GA. And actually, the second announcement we made just in time for the Madrid ATM Congress this year was our partnership with Frequentis. And a big focus for us this year is actually making UTM a real thing. And the only way you can really make it a real thing is if it can slot into the existing aviation world and it can work with the existing aviation systems that are out there. Because you can't go and deploy, you can't just go take a laptop and stick it in an air traffic control room and say, hey guys, you've now got a new console to look at. There are training, there are regulations, there's existing investments, and all of this would take a lot of time and cause a lot of concern, potentially some safety concerns. So we have to go and use what's already out there. So what we're starting to do now with NATS is we're learning a lot about some of the challenges of managing GA traffic, helping to automate and speed up some of the processes that are in place today for GA pilots that want to transit through Class D airspace using our automation technology and doing that securely using our UTM platform. And then over the next couple of months, you'll see NATS start to introduce more and more of those services, and we'll also be, I believe, automating the process for non-standard flight requests, which is the permission process you need to go through in the UK if you want to fly in controlled airspace today as a drone operator. So I guess you could say, cutting all the waffle out, this is the UK equivalent of the Lance system in the US, but actually going beyond just the world of drones and doing things like balloon flights, regular GA transit through controlled airspace as well. So you're starting to see, the UTM and the ATM systems are becoming one, and NATS are, applying their very long-standing expertise in safety and in technical innovation, and helping us do that in a way that is, compliant with their license, compliant with safety regulations. And our goal in all of this is to make it much, much, much easier for drone pilots to routinely and safely conduct BVLOS operations in the UK. But of course, you can't run before you can walk, right? You can't do BVLOS before you can solve the basics. So this is what this early stage release is about with NATS. But they've got some big plans that they'll be announcing in the coming months over the up on the run up to the summer period, and we're very proud to be part of those and accelerating the rollout of BVLOS here in the UK.
So, Richard, just a question: how will that be expanded to the rest of Europe?
That's a really good question. I think I think NATS are certainly very hopeful that the rest of Europe can see some pretty busy airspace that NATS manages, some pretty complex airspace with some unique safety challenges, and see that actually if NATS can do it, then actually that model can work in other territories across Europe. The technology that we've built, ultimately the PAM system, which is actually, from Altitude Angel's perspective, it's a system that's been around for about 2 years, but it's only in kind of late February that we really started talking about that. That system is what we call U-Space compliant. And given that Altitude Angel is one of a very, select few companies that are present throughout the European Commission U-Space program and the decision-making process, we're very confident that that solution is going to enable any European member state to be able to deploy what's called U1, U2, and U3 services more or less on day one. U4 takes a little bit of time, partly because there's still a relative amount of discussion to be had around what U4 is actually going to be. So in the nutshell, hopefully people can look at the case study in the UK, see this happening in a complex, busy airspace, see the complex relationship between UTM and ATM being managed safely, and then hopefully come and replicate that success in their own country too.
So, but you guys are not thinking on getting involved on the future regulations for drones, at least as a contributor and as a source of knowledge?
So maybe I didn't make myself clear. We're sitting on a lot of those regulation committees already, advising the Commission, certainly in Europe, but working more closely now with the FAA and actually in other countries around the world and the national aviation authorities there, on helping them to understand what's appropriate. And actually, a lot of the U-Space program, significant proportion of my team's time over the last 2 years has been spent sitting in dark rooms in Brussels, helping to define what those regulations are going to become, but also helping to advise regulators on the technical impacts of the various different decisions that are on the table. Because I think part of our role as a technology company is to try and lead and to show people what's doable. But also we have to help inform. We're not the people that will be making these decisions, but the regulators need people like Altitude Angel to show them how something can be done safely and compliantly, or how it can be adopted by the industry. So I think these are some of the very simple examples of how we're quite impactful in that regard. And I'm hopeful, coming back to your first question, that actually the rest of Europe will look at what's happening in the UK with NATS and say, right, okay, this is a challenging airspace, but actually they've gone ahead, they've deployed U-Space, U1, U2, U3 is on the way, and we'll be doing U4 demonstrators over the course of this year. So actually you're looking at a complete end-to-end deployment of a capable production UTM system in a matter of months, not years. And I think that's the key that we would certainly love to ship around the world so people can see that happening.
I just make a point here, Richard, that's really interesting. And the reason I say that is because, and I'm going to come back to the point you make about seeing your position as informing stakeholders in the industry. That's quite an important point, because I'm currently engaged as a safety consultant in developing beyond visual line of sight safety cases for industry partners who currently are really looking for that level of information. They're not necessarily getting it from the regulator. Largely, I think, because A, the regulator's too busy, or B, the regulator may not necessarily have that information available because they, like everyone else, are trying to develop it slightly ahead of industry to try and stay ahead of the curve. So I think it's important that some of the initiatives that you and NATS and the regulator are developing together are where the commercial aspects allow. I understand that there is a commercial and confidence element to it, but where they allow, that they are disseminated to industry at the right time, because there are so many companies out there that currently are really involved in visual line of sight work, but are desperate to get over that new horizon into the beyond visual line of sight world, and yet they don't quite know how to make those first couple of steps.
Yeah, I think you raised some really good points, and certainly a lot of the work that NATS is trying to do is to solve some of the broader questions rather than the industry specific questions. And I think if you look at a BV loss safety case, for example, all the ones that we've had the pleasure of being involved in today tend to be quite specific to the vertical that they're trying to solve. So you're looking for a BV loss case essentially for a motorway survey or a package delivery. They don't necessarily translate well to other fields. Whereas what we're trying to do with NATS is try and open up the skies more broadly, so that actually you could be in a position where you can use a service provided by NATS or by Altitude Angel and know that the regulator has certified that for a particular type of BV loss flight in a particular region. So although that wouldn't mean, you wouldn't have to go so far as to say that's a survey drone that's approved for surveying motorways, providing you've got an airworthy frame and you've met the other regulatory standards that are applying, you can simply say, I'm using Altitude Angel and I'm certified to go X number of miles beyond visual line of sight, providing I steer clear of, airports, that kind of thing. So we're trying to get to that point where actually more people can routinely and safely use an automation tool to get them over that bar. Because that's what, that's certainly one of the reasons we're in this game, is we want to get more people flying beyond visual line of sight, because that's really where, I think there was a study done very recently, but 80% of the commercial value in drones comes when we can do BV loss. And today we can't do BV loss routinely and simply. So what we're trying to do is solve that simple, I say simple, that situation awareness problem that is missing. And a huge part of that is where the UTM world needs to interoperate with the ATM world. And that's the part we're now really significantly focusing on with NATS. And what NATS are bringing to that bar is obviously that huge expertise they've got managing the airspace safely. And they're trying to turn that into, advice and guidance that the CAA can adopt, so that when the CAA get a safety case through, it says, I'm using the NATS system here, I'm using Altitude Angel there, therefore I can go and do this BV loss mission safely and routinely in my area. So we're trying to get there, but I do hear you. We get this a lot. People want that information. But again, because we're not commercially involved in the business of flight, right? We're not commercial drone operators. So, we see a lot of these things, but a lot of people pay a lot of money of their own money to develop those safety cases. So obviously they don't want to go ahead and share them, which is a bit of a shame. So I think that's one of the reasons you're looking at those capabilities from NATS, where they want to try and open up more of this airspace to more people.
We've got comments. Sorry, Craig, I'm going to jump in because Zoltan the Disparate is saying, how awkward is it going to be for the hobbyist that chooses not to join the BMFA without passing a competency test? So I think that's obviously just asking, how will that person get access to airspace? Does this assume that everybody is connected to the system, perhaps via a smartphone app or something? What does this...
So I think, just jumping in there, I think you've clearly got two scenarios, right? You've got well, maybe four if you think about it as a matrix. You've got beyond visual line of sight and visual line of sight, and then you've got commercial and recreational. And one of the things that we get asked a lot is what's Altitude Angel's visions of UTM, and usually that conversation goes straight into things like tracking and conspicuity and do you want to see all drones everywhere all the time? And actually, we're one of the first companies to turn around and say, do you actually care about where most of the drones are most of the time? And when you have that kind of conversation with people, their initial reaction is, well, of course we care. We we don't want anything flying around that isn't tracked, isn't registered. Well, actually, the fact of the matter is, if you've got a commercial drone flying around that weighs 150 kilograms and it's flying through controlled airspace, then clearly you care more about where that vehicle is than you do about someone flying a Phantom 4 20 meters above the ground in a field 50 miles from the nearest town. So there's this concept of what we at Altitude Angel call capability level. And that capability level allows a nation to adopt regulations in a very stepped manner that mean actually the majority of people that are flying for fun shouldn't have any real problems going ahead and flying wherever they like, providing it's not in controlled airspace. Now, those are the rules today, right? You can't just go pick up your drone and go fly through Heathrow CTR. or CTA, it's important not to endanger other aircraft. And I think 99% of drone pilots that I've met, both on the commercial side and the recreational side, don't want to cause anyone any problems. They don't want to endanger anyone. So what we're talking about here with NATS in the first instance is simply automating the process by which you go ahead and request permission to fly in controlled airspace. You probably saw my office lights just switch off there because I'm sat down. I'll go move in a minute. Now, unfortunately as well, waving, they're not sensitive enough. You actually have to get up and walk, which is terrible. It's like a fitness device. The other aspect is the commercial operations. Now, it's rare that you get someone who's doing commercial operation that isn't wanting to do it in fairly complex, busy urban airspace, or they want to do something funky around an airfield. Those folks are already subject to a lot of paperwork, a lot that they have to keep themselves for part of their operations manuals and their safety processes. But actually, if they interface with ATC, that process, I'm sure Craig will back me up here, that process of engaging with the air traffic control authorities can be quite lengthy, and it can be quite difficult and subject to different quality standards, depending on who you speak to. Always safe, but just different processing times. So we're trying to level that playing field. And actually, lots of people think UTM is about the absence of human beings. And maybe if you go forward 50, 60, 70 years, it starts to become more about that. But today, probably the most impactful thing we can do in the UTM space to move the industry along is to solve the basic communication problem that exists between people that want to fly drones and people that look after the airspace. So going back to Zoltan, the disparates challenge, I guess, I don't think anyone's asking you to purchase airspace. Certainly no one's asking you to pay. And actually, you don't pay NATS today to file a Class D transit request either. This is simply about making it easier to get into that airspace and also making it safer for the people who are getting, I think Andy quoted somewhere in the video, this is a lot more requests than they're used to getting. It's becoming a burden for them to process that. And that's taking them away from the job they have right now of looking after the airspace. So unless we want everyone to shut everything down, we have to find a way to solve that communication problem more efficiently and safely together. So this is not about locking down the airspace. It's actually about the total opposite. How do we get more people into it safely? And I think that starts, finishing my sentence now, which was a very long sentence, I think that starts by having a clear understanding of where you care about the risk most. And if that is not the recreational operator flying 10 feet above the ground, 30 miles from an airport, then there's no need to register, there's no need to declare a flight. But I just want to come back to the last point. We have about 6,500 people in the UK every month alone who voluntarily choose to share their information about where they're flying with everyone else. There's no law in the UK that says they do that. They don't get any special privileges for doing it, but they do get better safety information. They get connected to a world of ADS-B. They get connected to the weather forecast. They get connected to real-time NOTAMs. They get audio alerts now. These people care about safety. And I think this is what this is all about overall. It's safety.
And what's the charge for that? Is there a fee for that if I report my flight?
No, you can do it for free today. And you will always, and we're very adamant, certainly from Altitude Angel's perspective, you will always be able to report your flight to us completely for free. And in fact, this was a product discussion we had about 2.5 years ago, which is where you're trying to figure out how do you incentivize people to do the right thing. And you shouldn't have to incentivize people to do the right thing, but you do. And clearly the right thing here is not to charge people for doing the right thing, because that's going to drive the wrong behavior. No nominal fee is low enough to get that safety information. But then you do get into interesting questions about, well, if you're a commercial drone operator and you're already paying your license fees, you're already paying to fly in controlled airspace, are there additional services or information which we could bring to you that might save you time elsewhere that would be worth paying for? And then you're in the realms of pure commercial value. But the basic safety aspects of sharing situation awareness between stakeholders in the airspace, whether you're a drone or you're manned aviation, our network will always offer that for free to anyone. And that network is growing, around the world. I think if we look at all the flight reports we get, just going back to before the Madrid conference in my head, I think we were handling anywhere around 80 to 90,000 self-reported drone flights around the world. per month. And again, no one's required to do this, right? People are doing this because they care. So I think for me, that's a really interesting situation to be in.
Well,
Richard,
Bruce mentioned. Go on, Bruce.
One thing that happens here, I've used the AirMap system, and it reports where there are people flying drones in certain areas, but there's no mechanism to contact those people if you wanted to get more information or to advise them of something you were doing. It seems to be totally anonymous. There's no communications link. Do you offer that? And if so, what about the whole privacy issues and things? Is this going to be a bit of a nightmare?
I think that it's ripe for nightmare, which is why we spent so bloody long actually trying to think about how we solve this problem. And actually, we have a selfish need here, right? All the UTM companies, whether they realize it yet or not, are likely to not be the only UTM company operating in any geographic location. And that means they have a basic problem. Let's say I have a UTM. I happen to have one actually prepared. Here's one I made earlier. And Bruce has a UTM, and we're both managing flights, within the 10 square miles around my headquarters here. Bruce's customers are all planning flights and telling Bruce where they are. My customers are all planning flights and telling me where they are. But my product gets its value from keeping other people safe in the airspace. Now you've got a silo of data that I can't see. So what we're doing here is we're siloing the airspace, not bringing it together. So what we did probably over a year ago now was we created an open source data exchange protocol for flight declarations, and then we gave this to Gutma, and we said, look, this solves all of your information sharing problems. Now what we're doing is we're keeping all of our customer information secret, so that AirMap or Unifly or UTM provider X can't steal all our customer data. But what the protocol does is it allows those safety shapes where you're flying or the track of your drone to pop up in other systems when that system knows that someone else is flying near. So this gets to the last part of your question, is what happens if you want to report maybe a rogue drone, or you want to get in touch with the operator that, maybe my UTM is shown in your system. In other words, one of my customers' flights is showing up in Bruce's UTM, and one of Bruce's customers wants to get in touch with that pilot. The protocol allows for kind of redirect, if you like, in software terms. When one of Bruce's customers clicks on a flight that isn't managed by Bruce's UTM, our system will kick in and answer that query. So you're actually sent to Altitude Angel's server, and you follow our process of data protection for contacting one of our customers. And equally, the reverse is true. If I'm managing, one of my customers is looking at one of Bruce's UTM flights, then the protocol, would send Altitude Angel the right information, so that when one of our customers clicks on one of Bruce's drone flights, our system sends you with all the relevant information back to Bruce's server, so Bruce can answer the query. So we did the first realistic step, really, which was to anonymize all the flight information that's shared, but to share the shapes about who's flying what and where. And if you want to contact the other drone operator, we redirect you to the server that owns that data. And that means that, if you're, for example, this gets really complicated when you go to Europe, and European member states all have different data sharing laws, and it's all being standardized soon under the general data protection regulations. But for example, as a UK company, I can't store data about German people on my UK servers. I have to store them in Germany. And this is why it gets so complicated in the UTM world. Or actually it's not unique to the UTM world, but any cloud company will face this problem sooner or later. And that protocol that's open source solves all of that, Bruce. So there is a solution for it. The challenge now is getting adoption. And I think that's the bigger question is, we go out and we tout the open source flag and the importance of sharing safety information, but a lot of UTM companies are viewing your flight operation data about your customers as their secret source, because that's the data they want to monetize. But we're adamant, find some other data to monetize, but don't monetize the safety situation picture, because all you're going to do is make it much harder for a regulator to open the airspace. We have to play together.
You have a problem like the peering on internet providers, basically.
Yeah, I guess there are definitely multiple levels to that. But you're right. Ultimately, there needs to be a system through which that data can be exchanged. And one of the things we did along with that initially was say, well, actually, again, selfishly, as a UTM company, the last thing I want to do is have to discover every new UTM company that appears every day, right? Because I want to offer Altitude Angel users around the world the best possible flight planning experience, the best safety data I can. And given that we get a new UTM company like every week at the moment, it would be impossible for me to, to find those companies, establish a legal agreement with them, integrate with whatever bespoke protocol they've got, and actually have any real trust that there's a good quality management process in place. So along with our open source protocol, we built an open source service called UTM Exchange, which is a bit like it's like a message broker. And the idea is I just integrate with the UTM Exchange, and whenever something happens near one of my customers, I just get informed. And then other people just attach to the exchange, and we all have exactly one connection to the backbone to manage. And you're right, there is a corollary for this. It's called the internet. This is how we do internet today. But again, much like the early internet, it was quite siloed. You had Milnet and ARPANET, and you had all these other little silos, and they started to come together. What we don't want to do is do this in UTM land. But today, there are a lot of VC-backed companies out there. I'm VC-backed now, by the way, just to be completely transparent about this. But we have pretty patient investors, which is fantastic. But there are a lot of VC companies out there that are driving those companies to monetize data in pretty interesting ways. And I think that's contrary in some instances to better safety and operating picture. Zoltan's talking about lots of questions here, by the way. There's lots of things he's throwing out.
Let me just can I just ask a question as well, and you go back to Zoltan as well there.
Sure.
So let's and what was I going to ask? So you say companies may be considering monetizing their data, and this brings me back to putting the operator first in that UTM chart. Because if you put the operator first and you consider what he doesn't want to share, I might well be doing, I don't know, oil and gas inspections over several oil rigs somewhere or other, which generally are kind of a secret, open secret, or whatever, the frequency of which I fly these routes, whatever they are. I'm a good cowboy. That was the wrong term, wasn't it? I report my flights, but then you at Altitude Angel have that data, the frequency of my flights and exactly where they are. So, I wouldn't want a UTM provider to then be selling that data on. I'm sure you're going to say you don't, but are there people that might consider that to be one of the ways to money?
I imagine there are lots of business models out there, right? And I'm not privy to all of my competitors' business models, but what I can say to you is any use of Altitude Angel's products and services is subject to essentially our what we call our Altitude Angel ID system. And this works a lot like your Facebook account or your Google account or your Microsoft social account, where you can go and assign into that company's properties using a unique ID, and that company can store lots of data in that. And let's say, for example, in this instance, you're storing all of your flight data with our Altitude Angel ID system. That data is your data, right? We will use that data to minimize risk in the airspace, but not the PII, which is the personally identifiable. We won't be able to say that's Gary, and Gary's flying his DJI Inspire 1 or whatever it is for this pipeline survey. We'll only share the safety information, the parts that are relevant for avoiding a conflict in the airspace, if we have someone else nearby that needs to know about it. But again, that's not going to say that's Gary, here's his phone number and his email address, off you go, pay 10 quid and you can talk to him. That's not going to happen. But equally, what happens if you've given us all this information and then you want to give it to another application? Now, this is another aspect of something we do at Altitude Angels. We help other companies with some of the really complex parts of technology. Actually, if you're a flight planning company, you're not necessarily in the business of securing your infrastructure very well. You might have a good go at it, but actually security is one of those things that's really, really easy to get wrong. So you can use our Altitude Angel ID system to offer your customers, your users, a seamless sign-on experience. But here's what we do. If you connect as a developer of a third-party system to our Altitude Angel ID platform, you don't get an automatic write to everyone's data. You can ask Altitude Angel ID to log a user in for you, but it works exactly like your Facebook account, where it would say, hey, Gary's flight planning app wants to request the following data from your profile. Do you want to grant it? and you have the option to say yes or no. So our whole notion of data management is to put you, as the originator of that data, in control of it. The only thing that we do is we aggregate all the anonymous data together, and when there's a conflict, we share it. That's the crux of what we're doing with that data. We're very adamant that the services that we provide are the things that we monetize, because those are the things that you would pay for, because we're adding value to what you do. So if we're able to save you hours in your pre-flight planning, for example, because we've got some great data that you can click and get a great area risk assessment, then that's probably a service worth paying for. But that's very different to me monetizing the kind of metadata about how you run your business, your drone flights, and that's not a thing that we do here.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. But then, again, to put that operator first in that chart, as an operator, were I an operator, I would expect of a UTM system that that my government enforces on me, that I wouldn't want them to be doing that. I would want to know. I would definitely want to know that my operational use cases weren't being shared. But we should really, Zoltan's desperate to know about Rogue Drone. Please define. So we'll leave that to you, Richard.
Well, you have to rewind me back in my memory. I remember talking about Rogue Drone, but we've had several other conversations, and I'm also getting a text from my my BMW engineer at the same time telling me my car's going to cost a lot more to repair than I thought. But remind me, what was Zoltan? What was the context? We were talking about Rogue Drones. But I can't remember the context, so maybe someone can refresh me.
Well, I think you were just saying things would be reported. Here's one of my Rogue Drone. One of my Rogue Drone ideas would be somebody operating near a prison, perhaps to drop in sandwiches and flowers and chocolates. That sort of a thing.
All those nice things. No, that was right. It was in the context, I think, of reporting something that was concerning you. Now, the reason I think it's important to bring this up is because rogue is obviously quite an emotionally charged word, but actually rogue, from a bystander's perspective, can be anything that they find concerning, right? And that's what I mean when I say rogue. It might be someone who's deliberately flying in a way that contravenes safety or contravenes the regulations. It might be someone who's doing that ignorantly, or it might be someone who's hovering 10 feet above your back garden that you're really concerned about. Those, for me, are essentially good examples of what people write into Altitude Angel and ask us to help with. Can you tell me about this rogue drone that was hovering above the power line 20 minutes on a Saturday afternoon? What we found out is a lot of people would have their minds put at rest. If you were a commercial operator, for instance, you could say, hey, I am National Grid and we're doing a power line survey. We'll be gone in 20 minutes. 9 times out of 10, most people are just concerned that they don't know what that thing is. And 9 times out of 10, that's because the media have done such a fantastic job of painting these pictures of drones as being scary things. And if you get one in your back garden, it's probably there to kill you. So actually what people want is more information. And that's what we're trying to build into the protocol, is the ability for people to get that information, but not for people to be able to get your private information. That's the key. People need an outlet to be able to report something which concerns them. A bit like on, using my Facebook metaphors, you get the button that says, I want to report this. And then you get to say, oh, this makes me feel sad, or this makes me feel offended. It's that kind of thing. You need the ability to be able to say, I find this objectionable. I don't know what this is. Help me. And maybe as a commercial operator there, you do want the option to be able to say something about that drone. And then obviously the person who's responsible for aggregating those flights on behalf of their customers can then choose what action's most appropriate. Should they get in touch? Should they send an SMS to the drone operator to say, hey, there's a member of the public that's really concerned about your flight right now? Or should they simply do some kind of 3 strikes and you're out rule? I have no idea. My job is not to define the regulations and the policies, right? My job is to provide the technology that makes that possible, so that we can all get in the air and fly more safely.
Bruce, you said something about mouse traps earlier. What on earth are you talking about mouse traps?
Just saying that at the moment, it seems like the UTM war is one based on getting your product out there, getting relationships with key players like regulators and airspace administrators. And I see the AirMap is pushing really hard. I think they've done something in Switzerland. They're doing stuff in New Zealand. And I know Richard said there's some stuff, going on behind the scenes. But is it? Have you underestimated the amount of time, effort, and money involved in ensuring that your better mousetrap is widely known about, and how you're countering the air map situation where they seem to be going hell for leather on selling the sizzle.
That's a great phrase, and I think borrowing a quote from Andy at Nats, what you have here in the UK is a production system. You don't have a demo, you don't have a trial, you have a real thing that's been in deployment for months, operating on a critical kind of ATM backbone. And what I'm not saying there is that what's happening around the world right now with your air maps and your Uniflies and your other UTM companies is not a production system. It's trials. And the one thing you won't see Altitude Angel engage in, partly because this is not the way I do business, but it's just something I think in any industry, it's natural that you want to, you want to have a great marketing department, you want to tell a great story, you want to tell the whole world about your mousetrap. Whether it's better or not is another thing, but you're going to damn sure make sure your marketing says that it's better. What we don't need in this industry are bad examples, and we see this a lot. You get a lot of marketing out there. We've just signed up this country, or we're doing this thing with this country. 6 months later, where's the production system? Or 2 months later, or a year later, where are the learnings? If you're doing a trial, what did you find out? Share those findings. So I think what I'm trying to say here is when we do this at Altitude Angel, we establish a relationship and we partner with, and today we partner with a bunch of NSPs who we're not talking about, but we will be very soon, because we have to bring something of tangible benefit to people. There's no point doing the partnership other than grandstanding, right? So we don't do that at Altitude Angel. We don't think that's productive for the industry. We don't think it's productive to create definitions of UTM which aren't UTM but do suit a particular product SKU, if you like. And yes, it's hard to compete with sometimes, but we do what we've always done. We stick to our principles. We're reliable. We're real time. We're accurate. And then we have a fourth principle, which is we always do what we say we're going to do. That's what we're known for in this industry. And it was great to have so many folks come over to us on our stand in Madrid, for example, recognizing us now for the work that we're doing. And we're able to actually see, for example, something which we'd been marketing for the last, the few days on the run up, which was come and see us, take a flight from an iPad, send that into our cloud, send that through an automation rules engine, turn that into something called an ICAO Doc 4444 flight plan declaration, and surface that on a controller's airstrip. There was no fakery in that. You could see it, you could touch it. People were able to approve or reject their own flights. It was real. And the point of that demo was, if you're going to go ahead and talk about a capability, you have to be able to deploy that capability. And that's what we're trying to bring to this market, is credibility.
Oh, isn't that a bit of a fail in this market? Shouldn't you have more renderings and perhaps a bit of a crowdfunder? You're doing it wrong.
And a blockchain. And a blockchain,
yes.
Oh, blockchain,
yes,
artificial intelligence, big data.
Yes, big data, yes.
Yes, well, lots of big data. I think who was it? There was a chap. I probably shouldn't name him actually, but he's very big in the aviation world. And he said, "Richard, you've got to stop being so British, being so embarrassed about the great stuff you do." And then recently, one of our investors said, "You might benefit from being a little bit more American." And I think what they were saying is, do a bit more marketing. We've always had a principle. I think as a company that so long wasn't VC funded, we were privately funded, we chose very carefully what we marketed. And we always had a principle that when we go to market to say something, it's about something you can touch. It's about something that's real. We're not going to put out a press release to say what we might do just because it's cool, or because actually, blockchain or cryptocurrency or whatever it is the cool word. It has to have relevance. And, and this bloody blockchain thing drives me insane, because, we get a lot of people saying blockchain, UTM, blockchain, the way forward. It's all got to be blockchain. Most people don't understand what blockchain is in enough detail to be able to work out that actually most of the functions of a UTM system, at least as they're described in the Gutmann document, are completely unfit for the application of blockchain technology. Maybe some kind of public audit would make sense, because that's what blockchain is actually for, proof of work, as opposed to a registration system built in blockchain. and again, blockchain is only good if you've got millions of servers participating in those transactions and verifying them, as opposed to two run by the company that own the blockchain. Otherwise, you've not really solved the problem that you were trying to solve with blockchain in the first place. In other words, we don't go for stuff that's cool and glitzy and marketing-y. We do stuff that's appropriate for the industry. And I think that's, that's a tough standpoint to take when everyone around you is, doing the sexy marketing, getting the millions of dollars, building these cool relationships. Whatever it is irrelevant to us. It's noise. This is what we're doing. This is the focus we have. Yes, we can probably start to talk more about it now, but only because we've built more of it now and we're deploying more of it now and we've learned something from it now and we think we can share that with the world. So unless it's useful, we're not going to talk about it. I think that's the way forward. The only caveat I'll say to all of that is, I think we should probably do more to have a discussion around some of the technologies that we are considering and we are building, because actually they will have an impact on everyone from drone operators to aviators, regulators, Joe Public and Jane Public. I'd love to find a forum where we can have a sensible discussion about that stuff. And that's the key word, sensible. We need to find a way to do that. And we're going to try and figure out whether we can do like a monthly podcast or something, just where we can invite people in, or we'll go and invade someone else's podcast where we can talk about these factors and share more of that knowledge with the community. Because I don't want to create this example where, we're just going out there saying, right, guys, we're doing this thing with blockchain because blockchain is awesome, because it's going to make us lots of money, and screw everyone else. It's got to work. It's got to hit the world, and it's got to hit the world well. And you only do that through cooperation. And this is like a talk I gave a little while ago. The aviation world didn't get where it is today by being siloed, right? It cooperates, and actually it does cooperation on an international scale. The internet didn't get where it is today because everyone decided to not talk to each other. We have standards, we have interoperability, and we need to work together. And that, for me, is the crux of what we're trying to do with UTM. I'm probably too late now because there's lots of us.
It's a very. Let's keep him going. Let's just see how he works after that bottle of gin. Guy gets to go. Lives in a frequent light aircraft flight path. No one seems to regulate or catalogue them when they consistently fly below minimum altitude. And here, I've been watching quite a few people flying beneath me here. And that speaks, I suppose, to electronic conspicuity for manned aviation and bringing all that in. And what you were sort of mentioning then also speaks to, Zoltan mentioned 5G, and he's got a point there. ADS-B might not be the best way for RPA to show up in the world for lots of technical reasons. We might end up with another standard, but general aviation needs a standard. But you, as the UTM, need to be able to receive a file in any format or some form of electronic. A great one, I don't know if you saw it, Bruce, but a great one I saw was proposing using flashing the LEDs.
That was Ford, wasn't it? No.
Yeah, Ford
made that suggestion, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Semaphore, right. Is it? Blinky lights?
Yeah. But the BMW would be SOS, wouldn't it? Something like that.
No, the lights don't work. The lights don't work.
No, the lights don't work. That's right,
yeah.
That's right, yes. So your UTM has to be able to take in the data in whatever format it comes, and perhaps actively seek out what would be the best way of doing it for each particular technology group. Rant over.
Yes, that's the answer. I think when we talk about things like 5G, 4G, 3G, airwave, satcoms, Iridium, all these wonderful things, we try not to get too excited about them, because in 10 years, whatever's the current flavor won't be here. And actually, some of the things that are the current flavor don't work everywhere. So at Alted Angel, what we say we are is transport agnostic, which is a nice way of saying that's someone else's problem to fix. Whatever is the reliable transport mechanism you need, that is probably radio based, but in the future, far enough ahead, maybe some other subspace communications, whatever it is going to be, that simply needs to be able to establish a connection into the UTM provider. And actually, it would be really helpful if once it's got that transport connected, that it could speak some commonly agreed data exchange protocol. Now, again, we came back to, we've tried to create the first important ones here. But actually, there are, looking at the other way, looking at the aviation world, aviation does standards really well. And by that, what I mean is they have a standard for everything. There are millions of standards. The problem is picking one that you like and then applying it faithfully and diligently around the world. Not everyone implements the same standard in the same way. So when it comes the other way, the UTM job, essentially, and I was trying to explain this to someone the other day, at Altitude Angel, we see our job as being like a firewall, like a social, political, and a technical firewall between the drone world, the UTM world, the operators, the manufacturers, and their distinct and unique needs, and then everyone else. And actually, in the everyone else bucket, there's also a massive whopping chunk of that, which is the ATM world, the existing aviators, the existing systems that are out there. And our job is to act as that communication layer between these two different worlds. And this is why, I'm always fascinated, and I mean this with open heart and a warm heart, when we sit down with GA pilots, and some GA pilots cling on to the idea that, they're not tracked now, so why the hell should they be tracked in the future? And I do understand that. I think there's definitely a kind of, I guess if you're American, you'd say this is a civil liberties type question. But it's a safety question as well, right? I mean, you go back far enough through transport history, and there used to be men waving red flags in front of the first cars on the road. No one's advocating for these guys to come back, right? Because we've got better safety technologies now.
Bruce used to do that. It was one of Bruce's first jobs, I understand. Yeah,
anyway, he's still got his red flag today.
Yeah.
But you see, I think things evolve, things move on, and I think most technology companies, actually any company that wants to survive would probably say, you know what, if we always do today what we've done for the previous 200 tomorrows, we're always going to get what we've always got. And actually, we're trying to change the aviation landscape now to accommodate this brand new classification of users. I mean, what could be a more exciting time to be alive, right? We're going through an aerial revolution. Every single person in the entire world, if they so wanted now, if you've got a little bit of cash, you can put a drone into the airspace and fly around like a pilot. That is incredible. So why don't we want to figure out how to accommodate these people? And now we've got a situation where, we've got something, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like millions of drones in the world and a few, maybe 50, 60,000 registered commercial aircraft. In other words, there are more people flying drones today who aren't pilots than actually are pilots. This can't be a good way to try and lock everything down simply because we've got some people in the GA community, and it isn't everyone, but it's some pilots in the GA community that don't want to be tracked. We want to keep those people safe. Everyone wants to be safe. There are more things in the air, so clearly we have to do something about this. It's not sufficient as well to have everything dynamically and reacting and avoiding to everything else, because that can create more problems in certain scenarios as well. So it does make me slightly sensitive to those kind of arguments, because I come back to the safety question, and I can't find a good reason from a safety perspective to say, yeah, maybe we should continue to all be invisible as GA pilots. I do understand those concerns, but I can't see it holding water from a safety perspective. And I think, unless, I'm a very open guy as well. If someone can change my mind, please show me that piece of evidence that makes me go, yeah, I completely understand why. Lastly, I think just because I'm firing on all cylinders at the moment, unlike my BMW. There are certain classifications of air traffic today which we do track at Altitude Angel, either through ADS-B, which is the predominant method, admittedly, or through primary surveillance radar, where we have relationships with those countries that actually are exchanging that data with us. It would be very bad for us to give that data out. So we already, as a UTM company, we have a very developed sense of filtering, if you like, so that, if privacy is a concern about the type of operation you have, then that information can be shielded. But again, the basic information about the location of a thing that you need to avoid should be something which can be shared, I think. I'm looking at Zoltan now. Zoltan says, dude, you were talking about selling airspace. If I thought I wouldn't get banned, I would tell you. I can't repeat this on air. It's very rude. Zoltan
I believe that's a perfume brand, isn't it?
It is. I'm not quite sure what the point is there, Zoltan, but I don't think anyone's talking about selling airspace. I think maybe I've missed something. Maybe did I imply to anyone else that we were selling airspace?
I don't think so. I think that I think in the UK that's not a worry. I think in America, but it wouldn't be Altitude Angel doing it. I think there's quite a risk of that happening in the USA, and it is generally a worry. I think we are entering that exciting time where the first 500 feet of airspace is actually valuable. It hasn't been valuable until now, but now it kind of is, because Amazon wants to do its deliveries, and well, you name it. We all know we're all into this. That's why we're here. So yeah, it's suddenly that first 500 feet has a value that didn't have. It used to be a place that airliners went through on their way to the airways and getting on out of the way.
Richard, I've got a question. Have you thought of tapping into the glider network, GliderNet? Because they have this distributed network of receivers that, with the FLAM transponders and things. Is that going to be a valuable source of air traffic control information to you, or traffic movement information?
Yeah, so we're keen to get our hands on any surveillance information that can help improve the safety picture. I think we do actually receive FLAM today. There are a couple of aggregators of that data, but the problem with FLAM is that it seems to be really popular in Europe and nowhere else really uses it as predominantly as they do in Europe. I'm polarizing a little bit. There are outliers clearly, and one of the challenges we sometimes have is that even with ADS-B, particularly with the miniaturization of ADS-B now as well, where anyone can go and get a tiny little ADS-B transponder, you get things which aren't in the air sometimes broadcasting as well. In other words, there's not very good quality controls about what's being broadcast. And that can, if you're doing things like trajectory analysis, that can create some really unusual readings. So, when I think some folks in the UTM world think that actually a really good thing to do would be to stick an ADS-B transponder on every drone in the world. Quite apart from the scale issues, there are massive security issues, there are data quality concerns, there's spectrum concerns, the list goes on. But I get the picture, I get the idea. Tracking stuff would be good, but we have to figure out that, we have to be able to trust the data we're getting. And that's the point I'm making with FLAM, is it tends to be even less kind of, regulated is the wrong word, but, less stringently applied than the ADS-B chips were. Maybe that will change now, as I said, with the kind of influx of very cheap ADS-B transponders that you can buy now. But when we looked at the FLAM stuff, we certainly weren't getting the kind of quality that we'd hoped for out of it. But we still receive FLAM through those aggregation networks. We will show FLAM data when we detect a conflict between a pilot, a drone pilot that is, and probably a glider. But there are all sorts of challenges with that.
Yeah, FLAM is an interesting one. And on the tracking, coming back to the tracking and safety, we're actually making a few. The great thing about FLAM is you can make, or Open Glider Network is another, same protocol, few kilohertz apart. You can make the tracking. You're saying cheap trackers. You can make the tracker for an aircraft for about $50, and we have a network of about 30 ADS-B receivers in not that many. I'm completely making that up. It's about 20 in South Africa, and we're going to add FLAM to that as well, principally because a very good friend of one of our receiver group members and sadly passed away a little while ago in an air crash, and we had no idea where he was. No one had any idea where he was, and his crash actually happened within 500 meters of the airfield that he took off from in dense forest. Went straight in down through the trees, but we had no idea. No one had any idea he'd landed at that airport, and they searched for him for a week. He was only at the end of the thing. So that's why I want to say, all I want to say to the safety element and the tracking element of that is, my word, you would want to be tracked if you were in an incident or accident. Suddenly your privacy would be a lot less of a worry for you, and a lot more interest to your friends and family for you to be found. So FLAM can be found. And as to data accuracy, so again, with our chain of ADS-B receivers, we have a couple that can see some hangars down in Durban, and there are aircraft that are miscoded. And it's an international problem. I can't remember the hex code that it is, but engineers regularly put it on aircraft, and it comes up as a Colombian Police Force DC-3, and that happens all around the world. So yes, I guess your data could strip that out until that actual Colombian Air Force DC-3 is, or police DC-3, whatever it is flying somewhere.
Yeah.
But that also speaks to issues that air traffic service providers are going to have as well. Because if we're seeing as laymen, we're seeing these data issues as laymen, and they shouldn't be happening. So there plainly hasn't been enough control of that system and of the allocations of the correct ICAO codes and things, and for amateurs to be able to finding the problems and then reporting, feeding back to air traffic service providers, that's a little bit ridiculous. So that's part. Well, funny enough, the UV guys are coming on. I think it's on the 23rd. Is the 23rd of Tuesday? Something like that. They're coming on to talk about their mitigation methods for simply the number of aircraft that have been in the air. But yeah, no, I must stop ranting now as well. ADSB isn't completely the solution. And for Flam, of course, can come with Trappy's Team Black Sheep gear. Trappy's got Flam coming out of his long range stuff, so it's already available on model aircraft, and that's only a firmware upgrade as well, because it's an 868 meg radio, and it's only firmware that you've got to do to make it appear. So it's not like, again, this rant will finish after this. ADSB, you have to remember that standard was thought about in 1990, and they're talking about rolling it out in 2020. If you just stop and think about the technology, just apart from Bruce, of course, but just the change in phones between 1990 and 2020. Why on earth are we anyway? Ran over. I don't get it. I'm not with it. I don't get it. I'll let someone else run that.
One of the things you touched on there, which I really quite liked, was this notion that your privacy is really key, and actually privacy is quite a flexible topic depending on the context. It suddenly struck me that actually my new BMW actually does track and send my location probably to a BMW server as I drive, and I'm quite happy with that, because if my airbags go off, it's going to send my GPS coordinates and all the crash data about the car to the emergency responders. That's really, really good. But here's the thing, right? If we now apply this to the drone world, and as Altitude Angel, we're receiving all your drone flights, you absolutely want assurances that we're not going to do anything with that is, for commercial gain, or is going to potentially mean that, customers who are paying us more, for example, could get priority access through the airspace, which is why we are so adamant that actually there are certain functions of a UTM system which need to be run by a national entity, a regulated entity. Now, there are some countries that we're talking to, for example, that are thinking about a license process so that they can have a third party like Altitude Angel offer that kind of function for the country. But I want to be quite clear, from our point of view, that's not the preferred option. Certain things like maintaining a single situation awareness picture or a single registration database for the country, that shouldn't be something which is in the hand of a commercialized third party, regardless of how you put a firewall in there, the so-called Chinese firewalls. That should be a function which is a regulated function. The difference here, what we're advocating for, is something like a centralized registry that's run by a country should be accessible to multiple UTM companies in a defined technical manner, and that enables you to have a flourishing drone ecosystem with hundreds of drone companies, your Amazons, your Googles, your Uniflies, your Altitude Angels, everyone in that mix, as well as Bob and Jane's taxi drone delivery company. Everyone can play on a level playing field, but the basic fundamental concepts of privacy, security, safety in terms of deconfliction, that's handled by the entities that are already handling that today and have been handling that for years. And in many countries, most countries, that's the ANSP, right? That's the NATS of the world. So from our point of view, I think there are things you can do with technology, and as a technology company, sometimes we get really frustrated. You look at the world and you think, God, we can solve this problem. We've got a registry, we've got that, we got this, we got that. But there are deployment considerations to take into account, and I think that's the really important aspect, because USpace seeks to standardize some of those deployment considerations, but clearly, to use a bad metaphor for this industry, the rubber has to hit the road at some point, and where it hits the road within a member state, there are always possibilities for that member state to go slightly off piste with the way that they want to do things. And not every country, is part of the European Union, right? And potentially even Britain. So people are going to do their own thing. As I say, potentially, because I'm still hopeful that it will all change one day. But ultimately, as a UTM company, you have a lot of responsibilities, and solving problems with technology is only one of those responsibilities.
Now, there are a few issues that have to be sorted out also, because even so, for instance, an insurance company that might want to have access to the data to establish liabilities, how will that work? It's always go turn on the light, Richard.
Yeah, I feel like I need to, but I'm going to miss what you're saying about insurance. So I just sit really close to my monitors to get the light.
That's right. We can see you. We can see you in the movie now. Yeah,
it's quite disconcerting because all out here is just empty corridors and nothingness, and it's quite scary. So if I disappear, my latitude and longitude I'll give you later, so you know where to come looking for me.
What a pity you can't jump into your BMW to escape your tracked BMW. You can't see you running away from the monster.
But what I see is the issue with insurance companies going after that data, either to establish liability in case of problems, or also establishing fees for doing new insurances, and getting historical data from certain operators to get how do they have the patterns of operation they have and all that. That's where I believe the most problems might come up with insurance wanting to get access to that data.
Yeah. And you raise an interesting point as well, right? Because I think as a technology industry as a whole, we don't learn lessons very well. Like I remember recently, I think it was a car insurer, and it might have even been in the UK, where they were asking people for their Facebook profiles, and then they were running some kind of social mining experiment to work out whether they could charge you more or less for your whether you were more of a risk or less of a risk based on what you type when you're tweeting to your friends. And that's a blatant violation of Facebook's terms of service, and they got shut down for it. But you're seeing today, you are seeing a number of drone insurance companies emerge that are doing kind of like, pay per flight. And, full disclosure, we're partnered with a company in the UK called Cover Drone, who do commercial drone insurance. I think they're also bringing out a recreational policy soon. But, they're quite clear, they don't use the flight information in, as kind of like the sole decision point in their claim settlement. But how long will it be before you have insurance companies that will offer telematics insurance policies for drones? Because we're already doing it for cars today. You can go and get a discount on your insurance policy if you agree to put a black box in your car. And this is becoming a very, very popular option in Europe, certainly, because it's really expensive to insure your car as a young person in Europe, because, to an algorithm, you're infinitely more risky than a person who's had 30 years of really good driving. So the black box is seen as a way to get you to, to shut your, to reduce your premiums. So, we get a lot, we get
and
more.
The insurance companies are getting their way now in Europe with the black box on cars. That is going to be mandatory from, I believe, next year or in 2 years. So they'll have a black box. So nothing stops them to try to extend that to the drone world.
I'm surprised we're not doing it with drone technology now.
Yet.
I'm surprised it's not commonplace. I really am.
Commonplace or mandatory?
Well, commonplace, because I think there's a vested interest for quite a lot of stakeholders to do this, in the same way that in the insurance industry, this is technology that's been available for a while, but not everyone does it. My stepdaughter has had a black box in her first year after she passed the test when she was 17. But the second year, we moved to another provider, and it wasn't present. It wasn't a requirement. So
is that because she's built up enough of a profile for that to filter through the industry to keep her policy numbers down, or
a little? But it also came down to the fact that we were then able to. We had a bit more leeway then to go out and choose another provider who would see her as less of a risk. So so the black box requirement went away, and then all of a sudden, I mean, let's face it, for the user, particularly when you're a young person, it comes with pros and cons. It's good to manage the risk profile, but also what it does is it also provides you with a driving report on a monthly basis about how you corner, how you brake, how you accelerate away. It's got a whole load of metrics which are able to give the insurer a very good profile of what you are like as a driver. And that's, you know, if you take that over into the drone context, that should surely give us as an industry a better idea about how we go about doing our drone stuff.
Yeah, and for instance, in Portugal, one of the measures that the new drone law is trying to go to make mandatory is that if you fly a drone, you have to have a civil liability insurance. So with the civil liability insurance and the tracking of data that the insurance company might want, it will be very, very difficult to get an insurance for crazy. For instance, I imagine a drone racer trying to get himself an insurance if he also operates a commercial flight platform that goes and does video shooting. That guy will have a crazy profile on the insurance. So what happens to the insurance premium? And in Portugal, what is scheduled to become law is mandatory insurance.
Well, funnily enough, on Thursday, 2 days from now, I believe, no, 1 day from now, because now the future, we have Flock going to talk to me about their insurance offerings. So I will ask them these very questions and see if they dare answer. Well, we're in a tracked world, aren't we? In this modern world, and that's the bottom end. God, I'm getting it wrong. Gygax, a goat, is asking lots of questions there about Chinese components, and people will surely get around any mandatory black box ideas. People will, and people will not, like, as people drive a car without insurance in countries where you need insurance. You don't need insurance here in South Africa. So if you hire a car in South Africa on holiday, be very careful. Try not to have an accident, because it's very likely you're going to have an accident with someone that's uninsured. So just watch out. That's my service bulletin there. But yeah, people will get around it. It's just people that want to make money and want to move forward in the industry. They're not going to try and get around it. Bruce, what are you going to say?
This raises an interesting question for Richard, is how low do you want to go? Because at a certain level, when you've got all these toys, that's simply noise on your platform. Where do you draw the threshold where the importance of a drone becomes significant in terms of your traffic management? Because you've got people flying toys in the backyard, you've got other people flying racing quads, which might go up to, say, 5 or 6 meters, people doing freestyle might go up to 50 meters. How are you going to designate where you start taking an interest in this traffic? Is it going to be based on the EASA regulation, the classifications under EASA, or is it going to be your own set of things? Because otherwise, if you just take everything, the noise is going to be horrific. And if you want people to log their flight plans, you know, where do you say, well, you don't bother because we're not interested in you?
Yeah, I think a more interesting question for me, Bruce, is where, not necessarily what the weight of your aircraft is, because again, this is not something I get the luxury of defining. But where you want to fly is a more important variable to me in terms of whether, as a UTM company, I become more interested in the telemetry. And then once I've established where, let's just, for this argument, let's just say this is 5 miles around an airport. It's not, but let's just say it is 5 miles around an airport. Then I could become more sensitive about different weight bands, because actually I can do something about that if I can sense you from the ground. So in other words, let's take the cooperative element out of it in terms of, you know, people circumventing all the things that are there that legal law abiding citizens would do, but then they want to do some harm, you know, maybe to an aircraft or something. There I care less about the weight of the thing that you're flying, just that you're there and you're trying to do some harm. So I need some other capacity to detect you. And then from that picture of detection, I need to remove all the people who are doing the right thing, so that by a process of deduction, I'm left with all the people that aren't. And that's where I can focus my regulatory or my security response. So I'm afraid I can't say, you know, I agree with a 250 grams and above, because I think for me personally, and taking altitude angel out of it, if you're flying something that's 250 grams and you're in a field and you're 10 feet above the ground and you're nowhere near anyone, really, who cares what you're doing? You know, if you're having a bit of fun, who cares? But if you're flying that 250 thing, you know, 250 gram object 20 meters off of an approach path for an aircraft coming into land, then there's potential there that something could go wrong. And should I, as the authority in charge of that airspace, for example, should I have some capability to sense that? Probably yes. But again, it's not up, I think, for the UTM companies to say, do you know what, we should have ubiquitous tracking of everything, always, everywhere, all the time. And equally, I also don't think it should be up to us to set where each country gets sensitive. You know, for example, in the UK, you could make an argument that only airports are important things because that's where air users are most vulnerable. But then the prison guys will put their hand up and say, well, hang on, we're quite vulnerable to what's happening today with drones. And then you've got things like schools and then national parks. People are sensitive about these things in different locations. And I think that is a political discussion, and that's not for a UTM company to have. My job is to create the tech that can enforce those regulations as best as possible, and then provide solutions that help deliver enforcement capabilities for people who don't do what they're supposed to do, because those are the people that we're all worried about. Those are the people that will bring this.
Are the users of the platform are the ones that going to define which filters to apply, right, Richard?
I missed a little bit of that. Sorry, say again.
It's the users of the platform that are going to be establishing their own filters on which data to be made aware of.
Yeah, I think choice is a huge part, right? I mean, unless the law says we have to, as a UTM company, there are no such laws today, but, you know, as a UTM company, we have to make you aware of certain types of traffic or certain types of traffic that meet certain conditions, then obviously we'll always do that. Because, you know, part of what we try and do here is to make it easier for you to fly your drone more compliantly with the law, right? To make it easier for you to make safer decisions about where to operate. But of course, you know, as long as the law says there is a pilot in charge, and that pilot in charge happens to be a drone operator, then actually the best thing we can do is give you the best information to choose from. So I think what we're saying there is, you know, over time, standards will start to emerge by default. I think, you know, people will more often, you know, ask us for certain types of information and exclude others. Does that become a standard? Arguably, possibly yes, but whether or not the law is ever adapted to that, who knows? And I think it comes right back to the point I made right at the start. You know, part of what we do is to try and give authorities and regulators, ANSPs and other aviation stakeholders a window into what people are doing with drones today, so that they can be less concerned about it. You know, there's a natural fear of the unknown, right? So if we can put numbers, and to use horrible band terms, you know, if we can use big data and AI to help people understand that actually the majority of people flying drones aren't flying them into jet engines, you know, or into babies as they go around schools, that it helps to kind of take some of the temperature out of that conversation. You can have a more sensible conversation about the risk you're actually trying to mitigate.
Wow. I've just noticed, I just thought, oh, look, we've just gone over the hour. And then I've looked at the bit in the front, was looking at the minutes. We've actually just gone over the second hour. Oops.
Yeah. Gary, my full bladder dashboard warning light has come on. So I'm
flipping heck.
Yeah. If you flick that one, Gary, that'll just go out. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't want to flick the dashboard light on that. That's...
No, believe me, it won't go out. So I'm going to check out now. I don't know how long you're going to continue, but thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Very informative. So yeah, have a good night, all.
Take care, Craig.
And you look after yourself.
Bye.
Right.
So I'm going to put the hammer down shortly and say before I do that, oh, thank goodness he's gone. Does anyone else have anything else that they saw that I've forgotten to mention or anything else in the news?
I'm hoping that we got to the bottom of what Zoltan was asking.
I'm not sure we have.
I'm not sure we have.
I think
we're trying to, Zoltan.
There are worries, and there are definitely concerns over lower airspace, I think, but people just think I'm a complete conspiracy theorist, but then maybe I am. Richard's just saying recent FAA symposium conclusions was lack of data in the process of rulemaking. That, unfortunately, Richard, is a problem that you face in America, is that for some reason the FAA will not take anybody else's data, or they haven't been. It's a lot's been offered for various years, and in a lot of ways, if all of us just adopted the people with the best data in the world are the Australians, because they've been doing this the longest, and they've come up, I believe, with a lot of very sensible. I don't know, Bruce might argue against it, but a lot of sensible interpretations and things. So we should be looking to them, and perhaps looking to Richards and other UTM services to generate more data faster for regulators to make better decisions. But it's, yeah, doesn't seem to be happening. Anyway, let me stop that rant. Did anyone else see any other stories before?
Yes, but we'll leave it for next week, because everyone's got full bladders, and that's not a good thing.
No, fair enough then. All right then. Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Richard, for joining us. I'm very sorry that you have had car problems. I hope it gets fixed soon.
Thank you.
And welcome to the Accessories brand. I'm sure they'll be happy to sell you some accessories.
Oh, accessories. Oh, yes.
That's not what I heard.
Yeah, that's not what I heard either. Yes, that's not what I heard.
I've been there.
No, it's no.
And this webcast was brought to you by BMW.
Yeah,
only
no, it was brought to you by the relay service wagon, wasn't it? Whatever got you home.
This service was brought to you by the relay wagon today. Yeah, but I just apologies for turning up late, guys. But I was aware I owed you some time, and I'm glad I was able to get here. Hopefully, I can join the next one as well, and completely ruin the schedule for that as well.
Excellent.
That's no schedule. You are thinking ahead. Do you really think we have schedules?
Yeah, you run a tight ship. You do. I know you do.
And perhaps we should get a kind of commitment of Richard to get a regular light switch on his office.
Oh yes.
So the problem with that, right, is we've moved into this swanky new building, and after 7 p.m. it goes into eco-saving mode, and everything just switches off, and you can't override it. During the day it's fine, but in the evening, lights turn off, doors shut. Coffee machines stop working. I mean, this is horrible. I need my energy burning back.
Implications. Can't you complain under health and safety regulations? They're so powerful. You'll stumble in the dark and hurt yourself.
All right, guys. We're definitely going into rant mode. There's not enough gin. Dear viewer, don't forget, join us again, 2100 GMT next week for maybe a whole 2 hours and a bit thing. And then I've got this thing with Flock on Thursday. We've got a few other things coming up. And our Real World show, the SOS News Real World show, is coming up in San Francisco very soon as well. If you have a look at sosnews.com, it's at the top of the page. If you want to have a look at Altitude Angel and have a look at the data that's there wherever you are in the world, you can also have a look at, just click on Drone Safety Map and it's all there. Bruce and I look forward to looking at the app after tomorrow. And hopefully it'll work down there. We'll have their app tomorrow. We know it works in Western Spain. Anyway, thanks very much, everyone. I'll say good night to you, dear viewer. Take care of yourself. Have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.